The rain poured in sheets over Buenos Aires that night, pooling against the curb of Avenida Santa Fe and leaching color and warmth from the city's pulse. The gallery sat on the corner, bright in strips of glass and chrome, its lighting caught in cold puddles along the sidewalk. I still remember the thrumming inside my chest, more piercing than the slap of water against my battered umbrella. My hair was plastered to my neck, my shoes betrayed me, and I wanted so badly for the moment to mean something other than just another denial. Inside, the gallery lights bleached the room with an indifferent glow. I stepped in, water sheeting from my coat, and was met not with anticipation, but a quick, practiced dismissal. The manager, Christina, her apricot lipstick drawn sharp, approached with a brittle smile. "Señorcito, only invited guests past this hour. You had your appointment. I don't see your name." My file was water-stained, the name smudged with rain. I watched her scan the edges, a practiced, merciful glance at someone on the margins of the scene. "I told you last month about my feature," I said, voice pitching tight, "about the disappearances in Villa Lugano, the women, the missing files, the cover-up, the photographs, the interviews. You said to bring more." Christina placed the file on the desk, perfectly aligning it with the edge. "You're not an artist, Carlos. This place, it's not for exposés. We want stories, yes, but with beauty, reflection, not more darkness. You're talented, but it's," she hesitated on the word, brows pinched, too desperate, too obvious no. The crowd inside skirted by, glasses clinking. Every turn of laughter struck me like a call to depart. I must have stood there half a minute, heart in my throat, before I forced a staggered nod and stepped out into the corridor, the heavy, expensive doors forever shutting my shoulders forward. The rain had turned insistent. As if in tune with the weight in my stomach, it beat against my chest so heavily it felt like I was carrying the city's entire disappointment, Buenos Aires itself pressing me down for presuming to believe. I walked for blocks, breath fogging, coat sticking to my body, and every footstep echoed the same refrain I'd heard at home and in the streets. Reporters are untrustworthy, gossip mongers, dreamers with no spine or real worth. The stories were for others, the pretty, safe successes, the ones with family names and an uncle in the Congreso, not for me. Back then, my apartment above my tier's panaderia was small and smelled of yeast and old coffee. My abuela, smaller than her heavy skirts, would sit at the table every night and ask, just before kissing me to bed, "Still no luck, Carlito? Maybe you try El Correo? No, a real job with real hours." This obsession, its smoke. Your poor mama wanted you safe, not running to neighborhoods in the dark for what stories no one reads. Queens and ministers pay for news, don't let yourself drown chasing ghosts. My cousin Camillo, proud owner of the bakery's evening shift and a jaw tailored for disappointment, would smirk behind flour-dusted hands. "Our Carlos, thinking he's going to change the world with his notebook. You'll see, one day you'll wish you had flour under your nails, bread in your belly instead of ideas." Even friends at the local bar would arch their brows. "What's the point? Nobody cares about those girls. The police are in bed with the politicians. You'll end up missing yourself." At night, I'd sit with stacks of notes and bad coffee, hands trembling over recordings of women's voices, missing daughters, bruised wives who thought no one would ever listen. I transcribed their words while bread baked below, the city's lifeblood rising and falling outside my thin windowpanes. Months bled into years. I wrote, I pitched. Rejection slipped under my door like unpaid bills. Jobs I did take, court copywriter, part-time copyist for legal firms, felt like wearing someone else's skin, itching and tight and never quite right. Still, I held on. Sometimes when I'd walk along the riachuelo at dawn, the city strained with color and promise, I'd recall my mother's voice, gentle, hesitant, telling me to find the truth worth chasing, even if it runs faster than you. I clung to that. I clung to the faces, the voices of the mothers who let me record their stories, repeating details that stitched wounds small and secret, hoping someone would ever believe them. The big break came not with applause but warning. Early on a grey Tuesday I got a WhatsApp ping, a source in the commissariat warning me, "They're closing the file, Hijo. Whatever you have, publish it now." I rushed home and gathered my tapes, photos, my careful notes mapping connections between vanished women and the slush funds burrowed into municipal budgets. I sent emails to every international contact I'd ever met, German documentary crews, a British freelancer who ran dispatches on Latin American crime, a friend at Le Monde whose Spanish stuttered but who read desperation as a promise. I didn't eat, hardly slept. I stopped going to Camillo's Saturday asados. When the reply came, it wasn't glamorous, just a subject line, "Interested, call me." An American magazine, the sort I read for practice, wanted my story unedited, raw. I spent 3 months fact-checking, threading the photos and names together, every word a battleground. I haggled my way into unsafe interviews, paid for taxis with coins and promises, kept copies of everything stashed in 3 separate places in case someone broke in. The story went live at dawn on a Wednesday, just as a cruel wind punched at my window. I barely read the headline before my phone exploded: calls, then messages. The BBC picked it up. Argentinian television debated the findings, clumsy but persistent. Within 48 hours, the police reopened one cold case. 2 city officials were removed pending further inquiry. Denials filled the newspapers, but for once, no one could pretend the girls weren't missing. Their names were everywhere, low and dark, yes, but now impossible to shut away. Strangers wrote to thank me. The mothers, once curtain-eyed, found their daughters' stories on radio and in newsprint. I quit my copyist job. Other papers asked me to write for them, sometimes investigative, sometimes editorials. I started to eat better. I moved apartments, upriver and out of earshot of the bakery. Invitations appeared in my email, panels, workshops, a journalism prize I couldn't attend because I was covering another case in Salta. I sent money to my abuela for her medications. On Sundays I'd visit her, shy with bags of fruit. We'd pretend nothing had changed, but sometimes Camillo would move from his chopping board to lean silently in the doorway, a distant respect in his eyes that I never quite trusted. Years unspooled, names changed, governments toppled. I wrote, always with a fist around my chest. I built a name, not a big one, not celebrity, but a kind of weathered respect. My pieces would show up on buses and in coffee houses, my byline trailing beneath headlines in La Nación and elsewhere. Once an old teacher wrote to say, "I'm glad you kept at it. You give the city back its ghosts." And then, years later, the gallery came calling. It was buzzy and showy. A City Remembers, journalism and justice. They wanted me to exhibit the original materials from that story, the photographs and recordings, the notes. To sit on a panel to let people hear from the mothers, the ones who ever got their daughters back and the ones who never did. I stood outside the gallery in a suit that finally fit, the rain much softer this time, just kissing the pavement. Within, the space had changed faces, slicker, hungrier, younger artists with more piercings than portfolios. The air buzzed with anticipation, and this time someone held the door open for me. Inside, the wall to the right bore my story's title, the photographs enlarged and stark, girls on their quinceañeras, the empty shoes their mothers kept, the small, fearless smiles that haunted my dreams. My own voice echoed from the speakers, the audio of my interviews. Alongside mine, other exhibits, photographs of protests, graffiti in Palermo, news clippings, and there in the center stood a crowd. Whispers skirted around me as people read the captions, clutching pamphlets bearing my name and the case number that had, for 3 years, been a headline. I saw Camillo before he saw me. He'd come in his work clothes, dusted with flour, his girlfriend clutching his arm. My abuela, older and slower now, was with them, her cheekbones rising with something like pride. They hovered together, eyes on the exhibit, faces tilted up at the photographs as if finally glimpsing the meaning behind all those lost nights. Christina, the same gallery manager from years before, walked over, her steps deliberate. "Carlos, people won't stop asking for you." I nodded, heart thundering. Around me the crowd grew. Someone called my name, low and hesitant. "Carlos." My mother's friend, Senora Luisa, her eyes soft with the memory of my mother, pressed my hand in both of hers. "Your mama would have been so proud. I told her you would make something of all this stubbornness." Parents came one by one, fathers, aunts, grandmothers whose eyes glistened with both gratitude and a familiar, heavy loss. They shook my hand. Some hugged me, pressing their trembling chins into my shoulder. Even the mayor arrived, unfortunately flanked by photographers. Camillo approached. He didn't say anything at first, just looked at the wall, then at me, and nodded. "You did good, Carlos." Abuela slipped her arm through mine. "We should get you some bread, Mijo, you're too thin." The gallery hummed and flashed, strangers discussing my name and my work, arguing over the shape of justice in a city that so often forgets. Through the glass, the street shimmered with rain, noon sunlight streaking through clouds, imperfect but honest, just as this city has always been. Later that night, after the closing remarks, I stepped outside for air. The rain had stopped, leaving the city washed and electric. I stood under the awning, smelling the promise of bread and wet pavement. Behind me, laughter and applause spilled through the gallery doors, another panel beginning, more questions to answer. I stared across the avenida, watching the traffic lights blink red and green. I glanced down at my hands, lined with ink and old scars, the fingers that for so long held nothing but dreams. I thought about the years between that humiliating first gallery night and this one, the sting of rejection, the grip of loss, the grind of reconstruction. In this return, this victory, I felt none of the triumph I once imagined. Instead, I felt the pull of responsibility, the gravity of all those voices stitched into the backbone of my work. I remembered each mother, each lover whose loss filled the city with its silent ghosts. I wouldn't stay a hero forever. There would be more battles, harder cases, nights when nobody would listen again, but tonight, in the clean scent of rain and old memory, I felt, if not forgiveness, then a kind of acceptance. The city had let me speak. The families had been heard. The dream that once got me laughed out of rooms had taken root, stubborn as weeds between cobblestones. After a long minute, I crossed the street toward home, steeling myself against whatever the night would bring. The city behind me pulsed with possibility, still rough, still hungry, but no longer indifferent. It was a Buenos Aires reborn, and for the first time in a long while, I believed there was room in it for stubborn, anxious dreamers like me.